Thank you for the alarm. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all very much for coming on this glorious sort of spring afternoon in Guernsey, where it's difficult to believe if you look outside that we have any problems whatsoever. But here we are, having a panel. I'm pleased to welcome members of the Housing Committee. I would just like to remind everybody it's a parliamentary proceedings, so no questions from the floor from the public, I'm afraid. We will be transcribing this in due course because on Hansard, and it'll be on the state's website, and it is currently being live streamed, so language everybody. I will make a couple of points first. I did get asked recently if we were publishing terms of reference of our reviews. I don't know, we're not actually mandated to, but in the spirit of the disinfectant of transparency, I think the terms of reference for this one is what are you up to, what are your plans? That's the sort of gist of the afternoon session that we've got in context. We got asked why housing as well. We've done so many P&Rs, Scrutiny, done so many P&Rs. Well, not actually that many committees have done much yet, but we thought, given the importance of housing, and that you'd already previously made some public statements, Steve, that we thought that it would be an opportune moment to look at a principal committee. And also a caveat, finally, before I start. If we refer to Leal's Yard, what we're looking is going forward, not historical. We've got the ongoing States Property Unit panel where Leal's Yard is a specific issue, is something we've been trying to delve into for the last 4 months. I'm pleased to say that we finally got a load of information through, having, some might say, been stonewalled a little bit with hiding behind NDAs, and we did ask the developer to waive the NDA so we could continue with that, and I'm pleased to report that that has been done, and we're progressing that as speedily as we can. So, no further ado, let's move on to this afternoon. And maybe if I can just get the panellists to introduce themselves. To my left is Deputy Hayley Camp, and to my right is Deputy Liam McKenna, Vice President of Scrutiny. But if I might start to my middle, I'll start with yourself, obviously, Steve.
Okay, I'm Steve Williams. I'm the President of the Housing Committee.
Deputy Sasha Kazantseva-Miller, Vice President of the Committee.
And then everybody else is a director, so it's equal billing, so...
Ed Ashton, Director of Operations, Social Security, States Housing and Inclusion.
Okay.
Mine's not that long. I'm Claire Barrett, Director of Infrastructure and Environment.
Okay, and
I'm Emma Letitia, Head of Housing and Infrastructure.
Well, please do welcome you all. I'll start with an easy one. It is an easy one. It's an underarm. It really is an underarm. So if we look at the mandate, if you go on the state's website, the mandate of the committee is to enable community well-being and economic prosperity by ensuring all people living in Guernsey will have access to a range of good quality housing that is affordable, secure, energy efficient and adequate for their needs. Now, if that was a mandate ever designed by a bureaucracy, there you have one there. Steve, Deputy Williams, may I ask you, first and foremost, what do you see as the role of the committee and what are you seeking to improve?
What we see as the principal challenge, which affects a lot of things across the board in the housing market, is that demand has exceeded supply, house prices have increased dramatically, rents have increased dramatically, hence there is a logjam in the market. We need to increase the supply of homes faster than it has been. That will then have knock-on impacts in terms of the well-being and in terms of more money, ideally in people's pockets rather than going into rent or mortgages. So it has quite a wide impact on that purpose and that mandate if we can increase the supply. Now, there are other issues as well that we're working on, but we've tried to make it first and foremost our principal aim in order that, because when you actually look at it, there's a whole range of issues that we can address. And the ENI, we've worked off the existing ENI Guernsey Housing Plan, which had 28 work streams, and we've tried to prioritise specifically around increasing the supply of homes, new homes, or reuse of existing buildings, basically new accommodation.
So I'm not going to be awkward, but just be pedantic. In terms of you're describing me a problem there. May I ask you, what do you think that the role of the committee is? The role of the committee
to enable and facilitate wherever we possibly can the increase in the supply of homes to enable a number of these other benefits to happen.
So broadly speaking, the committee's purpose is to increase the supply of housing on the island.
Well, I think it's one of its major aims. I don't think it's only aim, but I think part of what we're trying to do is to then support the other elements of that purpose and mandate that you mentioned.
And speaking of mandate then, do you think in terms of the mandate itself and the remit, and resources that you've got available, do you think you've got that to fulfil your task?
I think everyone would always want more resources and more ability to tackle things. It's a big challenge. It doesn't happen overnight. There are no very simple quick fixes to this problem, otherwise it would have happened. So we are progressively working away at it. What we've done is not rip up the old Guernsey housing plan as was with E&I in the last term, because we don't want to start from scratch and start a whole new level of bureaucracy. So we're trying to work off what's there, refine it and prioritise it towards supply of homes. In terms of our resource, we are constantly working with the officers in terms of pushing them in order to be able to get things along and press things urgently. Inevitably, I think everyone's going to say, yes, we'd like some more resource, but we have financial constraints as well, so we're very mindful of that.
Yeah, I suppose, obviously we'll get to the housing plan with its 28 work streams at some point, maybe, because that's rather a feast, isn't it, rather? But again, just to come back to the point about the actual brief, the mandate itself is to enable community wellbeing. A lot of these mandates that have been drafted are to advise, to provide, to lead, exactly. To enable, it's a bit, what, do you have the powers to do the task to hand?
I agree, it's very general. And how do you measure that? In terms of what we feel, it's will we come out of this term feeling that accommodation is more affordable? And there are indicators for that. And we have data and stats for affordability on private rents specifically, and on the multipliers of average incomes in relation to average prices. So I think there is data and indicators that we can work on. And we obviously know about the new homes being constructed as well and what's coming into the market. So it's a very general phrase, the enable, but in terms of how we perceive it is we need to get to trying to make more housing more affordable to people in the island, try to retain our youth, try to make it more affordable for everyone through singles, families and older people as well.
Okay, again, you're describing things to me, but how it looks, not what you're doing.
Well, I'm trying to get practical, because I think that's the practical issues of what the person in the street understands. They don't really want theories and strategies and plans. They want action, and they want to see things happening. And that's why we've been trying to drill down, for example, in contacting all the developers and landowners with sites over 5 units plus that sat there doing nothing. They've got the planning permission. They've gone through all that. As far as planning are concerned, great, tick the box. They've got planning. We've hit some numbers. But obviously, are they building them? And we're trying to drill into that. So it's practical stuff. We don't want to finish this 4-year term having said, well, we've got a whole new set of plans. People want to see some action in the street or on the sites.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. I'm just trying to start.
So it's trying to bring it down to what's affecting people in their daily life. And to be honest, every time we discuss anything at committee, I think we have the conversation, does this matter to the person in the street or not? Will this have a material impact in trying to help people?
Yeah, but again, I'm just sticking with the mandate and the approval again.
Sure.
And again, I'm going to look to Deputy Kazant-Saver-Miller. I said it just straight away this time. And you were involved in the actual development of it. In terms of the actual mandate in the brief, is it an empowering enough brief, do you feel, for the committee's work?
I think in the creation of the Committee of Housing in the previous political term, the principle of what I was trying to do with the recurrence at the time was to bring some of those disparate mandates that were previously split among a number of committees into one principal committee, given that housing issues and pressures across the whole economy, not just affordable housing, was so prominent and remain to be prominent. And I think this was very much the driving force about why a committee with a mandate on housing was created and strongly supported by the Assembly at the time. I think it's fair to say that this is still, I would say, early stages of formation, because it's a new committee. It's a reasonably new team as well. It's a new political committee, except with myself, who is a deputy from the previous political term. The committee perceives that some of its mandate has not been fully formed yet, and there remain issues such as around key worker housing mandate that's remained with other committees. In the formation of the committee, also what was strongly indicated at the time and during the debate, that there are clearly other parts of the organisation that are quite important to the delivery of the housing mandate, especially in relation to the State's Property Unit, who are the guardians of the state's land and have the resources to deliver on a number of issues. And I think outlining the roles and responsibilities between the committee and the central support services will remain important in the ability to deliver our mandate in the future. I think it's work in progress. I think we're moving in the right direction, but we're not 100% there yet, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, look, I should have said what we're going to do is, in terms of our structure, well, we've got 2 or 3 big ticket sort of type question areas to talk about, and then we'll drop down into about 5 or 6 different specific areas. So, and I'm in danger of straying into Deputy Camp's area. So, basically, I'll make the point. I just googled it. You know, enable is to give someone the authority or the means to do something. That's the first definition if you type it in. And that was where I was concerned from. I look at the committee and said, have you got the powers to do it? But I'll park that one for a moment, and I'll pass over to Deputy Camp, who has a few questions probably related to this area at this point.
Yeah, and it really sort of because what we noticed that the requête really talked about fragmentation under the previous committee split, siloed working practices as a result of the same, and a need for greater accountability, given that delivery of homes fell significantly short of targeted around 300 homes, new homes per year targeted by the states previously. So I think what we're sort of interested in is understanding, with perhaps 1 or 2 concrete examples of what you're considering, how you can substantively eliminate first that sort of siloed working practices that were identified as part of the requête and therefore part of the rationale behind forming the housing committee.
Well, I wasn't in the term last, so I'm not sure about what the level of the silo mentality was. We've obviously got whole new sets of committees and different politicians on those in particular. I don't know whether you want to mention, do you want to cover that?
Yeah, I think there's some really important examples we can point to. So previously, the core of the Guernsey housing plan was a split between affordable housing and private market housing. When we started the committee, we fundamentally, I think, changed our approach in terms of being much more site-specific. So really going on and understanding what are the concerns, specific concerns that different sites that have been maybe in the pipeline but haven't progressed are experiencing. And through understanding the barriers and concerns that the different sites have been facing, we're trying to develop a comprehensive view across the whole pipeline without having to split it between private and affordable. And looking at this holistically in a joined-up approach will allow us to hopefully bring forward not just affordable housing, but private housing as well. This is probably one of the most fundamental changes in thinking and delivery approach that we're trying to bring. And this is where actually looking at more joint ventures where we are potentially working with private developers to bring forward affordable housing through private sites, but also facilitating bringing forward the private sites as well is fundamental. So we think this has actually really changed the way the committee is approaching it because of this joined up mandate. I think other small examples, but I think we're really seeing the benefit of it. So for example, St. Julian's was previously a little element of the Committee for Health and Social Care. The mandate has been transferred through the requête. There was an amendment by Deputy Gavin St. Pierre, and the operational oversight has been transferred to us. And I think generally there's been a really positive momentum and perception that it is now in the right place, so that we can dedicate the time and the right oversight and the thinking that's required, but also think about it holistically in terms of the wider potential delivery, because it's a prime site. There's a lot of what you can do with that site. So I think that's just a little specific example where St. Julian's was previously hidden away in the mandate of a big committee.
So in essence, sort of unlocking some of this siloed working, or perhaps moving it to focus, you believe that you can, I suppose, achieve things that wasn't sort of possible under the previous structure.
I mean, my perception is obviously the other 2 committees that dealt with housing would be ESS, obviously on the social housing, and ENI on the private market, principally, or across the market. They had lots of other issues as well, other responsibilities. And the difficulty is you're always pulled different directions in terms of the urgency of different matters. And we are singularly focused on the housing market, and that has helped us. There's a lot to the housing market. There's a whole range of things that we can tackle, but we are specifically focused on that, and therefore not being distracted with other matters helps us, because everything we're talking about has some impact in some shape or form on the housing market and people within the housing market. So that really, really does help us, I think, and focuses our attention. And where there are crossovers with other committees on other matters that might be to do with infrastructure, things like that, or land or planning matters, then we will talk to those other committees. And we feel we've got a good working relationship with those other committees in talking to them about where we do have overlap, and specifically what's coming forward with the IDP review, if it was successful, is there's the potential zoning of affordable housing sites. This is in lieu really effectively of GP11 going, but it does focus the attention on those sites and then how we bring them forward, and we will be focusing our time and attention to try and do that, because they potentially have less obstacles to them than the larger sites in the island, specifically the Bray de Val area, where there are obviously longer term infrastructure challenges that need to happen first in order to start before we can produce any homes there.
Yeah, so sort of looking further at the I suppose the rationale for forming the committee.
Yeah.
One of the reasons was the sort of alleged inaction on house building under previous arrangements. So what specific actions have you already taken to address this that would not have been possible under the old committee structure?
Good question. I mean, we've obviously been going 9 months, so it doesn't happen overnight.
No, of course.
And obviously, I think the story, I hope, would be a heck of a lot different in, say, 2 years' time or 3 years' time, for sure. Interestingly, construction is currently now at a 5-year high, but we're not taking any credit for that. We've only been going 9 months. But there have been successes in terms of sites where we've talked to, again, practicalities of talking to individual landowners and developers. Why has it not come forward? Claire has been leading on that and started this process, to be fair, under E&I, and we've continued it because we thought it was good work. And we need to keep pushing at it as well, because it's not just a have one conversation, walk away and leave it. We need to keep talking to these developers and landowners. And we've seen some of the sites come forward faster than they would have done, only because sometimes they say they're waiting for information. We think they're not. We're waiting for them, and there's been a bit of a sort of, sometimes it's just information flow issues. So nothing fundamental, but it's been holding things up. And so we've been able to overcome some of the obstacles and move some of these things further forward faster. We can't say something specifically, numbers have been built more in the last 9 months because it takes time to build. But we're seeing an impetus. And there's something else that has been worked on that we've been urgently encouraging working with the staff on is a list of all the sites that have got planning permission that haven't been developed. And that's going to go out, and we only had a conversation about it this morning, and I've got some agreement that it's going to be going out next week. So it's called a housing site of all the pieces of land. This is information in the public domain, but it's all in individual planning applications, hundreds of them. And because there's currently about 439 plots of land with detailed planning permission that's not been built. And so this is just from the latest stats that are publicly given out, so this was not confidential information. And what we're sending out is information that's in the public realm on this list, and it'll have a list of the sites and the planning. And from what we've been able to gather, and this isn't confidential information, but just what we anticipate the timeframes are for those pieces of land or sites coming forward, if they are going to come forward. And what it helps us is to monitor then what's not coming forward and start talking to those people about, well, are you going to do it or aren't you going to do it, and what's the obstacles?
And I think just to add to that, what we're trying to do is to showcase the combined pipeline of the sites that are coming through which both affordable and private market can be developed. And I think previously the focus was really strongly on the affordable housing delivery program via ESS, right? And what was the private sector was kind of, the perception was that we just leave it to the private sector, it's not an our issue. What we're fundamentally seeing is that you've got to look at it in a combined way, and a lot of the sites have barriers which we need to help unlock. and some of that work is really progressing. And I think the committee, what we did is to say, listen, this is absolutely crucial, is to, not at theoretical policy level, but at side-by-side, very practical, pragmatic level, to understand what are the barriers we are facing. And also to change the approach to say, listen, we can look at joint venture delivery of sites where we're not saying this is just affordable, this is just private market. Can we do it in a combined fashion? So we think this work is still in progress, but we think it could be transformational in terms of unlocking delivery across many sites.
I think we've had more time as a single focus committee to drill into these things and see what the highest priorities are, in our opinion, to deliver an impact on people's lives in the island. And just another simple thing from this framework list is it gives the building trade an idea about what work's coming forward. Mm-hmm. So, we've talked to people in the industry, so it's been shared with the Guernsey Building Trade representative body, and they've given us feedback on it. They think it's great as well, because although it's in the public domain, it's all over the place, and the staff have been able to pull it all together, which has not been done before. So it gives you that picture. It tells people what's out there. I mean, it will expose to some extent some that have just been sat there and not doing anything. Others are progressing, potentially in the background and coming forward. And in terms of building contractors and suppliers, they can sort of see potentially what might be coming forward as well. Because we're also been talking about building capacity, and we may get onto that today, I don't know. But there's a concern, to some extent, contractors won't gear up and employ more staff if they don't know the work's coming. Mm-hmm. So there's a conundrum there, and part of this will help people see potentially, I mean, there's no guarantee they're all going to sort of, they're private developers and it's in their hands. But it potentially shows the flow of work that might come off.
And this might sort of naturally, I suppose, segue into that. There's high expectations on the Housing Committee. So how does that sort of translate into accountability mechanisms that you will utilise to plan future targets and judge success against them, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got to be monitoring all the time in terms of what new homes are in construction, what isn't, but also affordability issues with the data that we do get on the private rents in relation to, in terms of element with the proportion of income that goes into private rents, and also multiples on average mortgages or average affordability in relation to average incomes. So those are sort of indicators that we can follow. And otherwise, we are also looking at all the stats on waiting lists, on homelessness, for example, which has been an issue that has been raised a lot and is a problem in the island. We have really active conversations, meetings regularly now with the third sector organisations. So specifically, we've been talking with At Home in Guernsey, Action for Children and Caritas, amongst others. And we are exploring some opportunities with them to get more accommodation in order that they can house more people who are in danger of homelessness. So, and there are, they're early they're at a stage where we don't know whether certain things are going to come off or not, but there's some really concrete work going on in terms of trying to secure more accommodation for homelessness.
Mm-hmm. And how will the states and the public be informed of progress or underperformance against your sort of plans?
Well, we would like to come out with performance stats on that, and I think we need to look at that on a more regular basis. To some extent, I'd like to come out when you've got something to say, but what you're saying is that's a regular monitoring exercise. So, yeah, I would like us to be coming out with something to show people. Yeah.
So I think what the next key step for the committee is to publish its committee work plan. Mm-hmm. So, we're very much working on that. Following that, there may be more specific strategies and plans that come out of that. For example, a new version of the, let's say, Guernsey housing plan. But what we're really fundamentally also wanting to deliver is a delivery plan, which is the one document which I think would be more specific about when we're expecting delivery of what. And I think we hopefully will be able to put more specific targets around that delivery plan. But there will be other more concrete niche pieces of work, such as around homelessness, that I think we can, as we work with the third sector especially, we could bring forward a more concrete progress report.
Yeah, we've been working on the delivery plan, because it's all well and good having the plan, but how are you going to deliver it? And so we need to put more flesh on that. And inevitably, the more you drill into certain things, it raises other questions. So it's just trying to make sure we come forward with something that we're happy with. Other things that we are also coming to the States with will be more setting out clearer roles and responsibilities for landlords and tenants. So there's approximately 7,000 private rented properties in the island. That's a lot of people. It's a big proportion of the market, circa 27% of the housing stock. And at the moment, there's really very little guidance in terms of roles and responsibilities for landlords and tenants. There's no standardised tenancy agreement as a sort of a guide even. I mean, we're not going to enforce necessarily that, but as a guide even. So we're aware that some people don't have tenancy agreements. And so those are areas where we want to make life easier for landlords to let their property, to make sure they come into the market and they're not taken out because of too much hassle. But we also want to safeguard tenants who have a right to live there in security and peace and trust and confidence there. So there are areas, and we're aware, we're dealing with a number of constituent issues, inevitably, and we are on the case and trying to help in those situations. But to some extent, it's a bit scant, other than people just going to court, which is expensive, long-winded, and puts a lot of people off. So what we want to do is to start by coming through roles and responsibilities for landlords and tenants. And there may be sort of steps that we take further down the line that might then lead to a tribunal that's being set up in terms of an alternative to a court process. That's quite a big piece of work to pull off, and we want to get something out there to start the process of trying to help landlords and tenants in the market. So we're hoping that we can try and bring something to the States in June for debate about the roles and responsibilities.
Can I ask one question before we go on to sort of specifics and hand over to Deputy McKenna? I suppose the one question I did want to ask before we move on is, in terms of the fact that sort of the Housing Committee is designed to make things easier, which committees could block housing from achieving its targets?
What do you think?
Well, when we formed the committee, I think the two probably key committees with interdependencies for housing delivery are the planning authority, so DPA, and PNR in relation to their responsibility with state's property. ENI is also important in terms of infrastructure delivery, but those two remain absolutely crucial committees. I think consistently through the work, engaging very actively with developers and owners of sites, planning has come consistently as an issue, maybe not immediate, because I think there's been a lot of progress, and under the new DPA as well, I think there's a lot of really positive progress in progressing that. But perhaps historically, planning continues, unfortunately, to have been seen as potentially a barrier and a blocker. And the issue is, whenever planning applications get stuck in the system for longer than necessary, that's just additional costs which we cannot, afford as an island. But probably also the crucial committee is in relation to our engagement with PNR and clarity around roles and responsibilities, and how central services support principal committees in delivering their mandate. And I do think there has to be work done to map out actually exactly who is responsible for what and how that engagement should be mapped out.
I would say, just on the DPA side of things, I think there is a more fresh approach has been this term, and we are overcoming a number of obstacles where people are converting heritage buildings, things like this, which have been seen as a major obstacle in the past. And I think quite often things are actually simpler than people think, and the public perceive there might be a bigger problem than there really is. And so there's quite a lot of work in terms of specifically the new head of the DPA is keen to get the messages out there to the public in terms of what can be done and how the planning DPA can assist people. So I think the working relationship is good there, and I think it's only going to give us more benefit to the island, undoubtedly.
I'm sure Deputy Inder would appreciate the compliment. He's unfortunately left us, though. We are actually sticking with the bigger picture, but Deputy McKenna's got a couple of questions on that, and I'll come back to the point.
Sure. I mean, my sort of part here is to ask about key worker housing, but I could just ask, I don't mind who answers the question, what are we doing with the Cattell Hospital, the King Edward Hospital and the Duchess of Kent?
Right. Well, good question. I mean, it's not been officially yet zoned for housing because obviously it's going through the IDP review. It's obviously being promoted for residential. However, I understand, I mean, it's not under housing specifically, but I understand a care home facility of some sort is meant to be provided up at, or proposed to be provided up at the King Edward. And then the rest of it, obviously there is also a lot of staff currently using Cattell Hospital. We have been talking with officers about the fact we need a phased development of the Cattell Hospital. We can't wait for, if there are circa 300 staff working out of that, largely HSC, we can't wait for the last one to leave. We need to get plans in place, and we need to, potentially, we can have a phased development there, which you can carve the site up. There's a lot of land. It's a big asset, and we need to be doing something with it. We've got a housing problem. It's in a good location, so I'm keen that we press on as swiftly as we can. There are obviously some blockages with, particularly the staff who are based there. I don't know whether Claire's obviously got a oversight from a planning side of things. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, as you said, Deputy Williams, it's subject to the IDP review, which is likely the focused review, which is likely to go to the States in September, having been through the inquiry process. So subject to that zoning being agreed by the States, it does require an element of affordable housing on that site. It also requires a development framework, and I think the Housing Committee would like to start to think about what that development framework might look about, to try and front load it.
Listen, I think that's great. I mean, you have to excuse me because, I mean, to me, if you've got health and social care workers in the Cattell Hospital, we've got dozens of free office space, so, you know, we could accommodate them tomorrow. You could have them out really quick. But when you say affordable housing, this is where you please excuse me. What price is affordable?
Well, the definition, planning-wise, is anything that is effectively sub-market in terms of lower than market rents, lower than market sale, but locking it in perpetuity. So, you know, somebody's not just buying cheap, selling expensive, cashing in on it. Standardly working either through States Housing or a housing association, but it also can be a private developer, provided there are legal contracts in place to ensure that it remains. You have to put some badge on it, and I know affordable means... No, it's a good question because it comes up all the time. Yeah. But what is the definition of affordable? And that is different things to different people. But from a planning point of view, because you've got to put some definition into the planning documents. In the IDP, it says it's below market level for rent or below market level for sales. But the principal thing is you need to lock that in, otherwise people cash in and walk away with the money.
And if I could just clarify, there's affordable housing in terms of the land use policies is a legal definition. So it's actually about social housing, partial ownership, specialised housing, or anything else that the market isn't producing. So it's not about affordability.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. It's just what I'm saying is, it wasn't a trick question. Yeah. I was just saying, it's what price is it? I don't know. I don't know, so it's not a trick question. No. But to me, you know, when you see the price of property as it is, I call that unaffordable housing. So what is affordable? Yeah. So when you say about a care home on King Edward... That's
all I heard looking through the media. I know nothing.
Okay, well, there's a third of it's already gone to a local private health supplier. Mm-hmm. So again, to me, that was a massive mistake because you've got a wonderful estate there in the King Edward Hospital. Also, you've got key worker housing on the King Edward site, and that's been given out to the bus company. But you know, but you could listen. But let me get to the one. Yeah. What are we doing with the Duchess of Kent? Because if you say there's health and social care staff on the ground floor, like we said, there's dozens of office space. They could be out in the morning.
We have not been involved at all in the Duchess of Kent.
Okay. That's
so
fair enough. No,
I know where
that's
it is,
fair enough.
but we've not been involved in it at all. So,
But I can tell you as a
we've
healthcare
had no conversations
professional-
with anyone about
No,
it.
I can tell you as a healthcare professional, 42 years, a former matron told me there's enough for 100 staff on the actual hospital site at the Duchess of Kent. So we could get the staff out from health and social care, plenty of office space, but well, I'll move on. So yeah.
So it's not under our remit.
Okay.
That's probably a property services sort of type question.
Okay.
But you made a good point about affordable and pricing, and it comes back to sort of a couple of questions I wanted to start on the big ticket sort of stuff first. And I've heard you, Steve, talk about ratios and stuff like that.
Yeah.
If you go back to the fundamental point about what's the role of the committee, increasing the supply of housing. I heard some nice conversations about doing things differently, etc., etc. We're all nice. We're all on the same page. We're doing it in an integrated fashion. We're planning well. When are we going to see change, and what change are you looking to affect?
I mean, the other things that we're going to do is obviously, so GHA have got some plans for some build. Obviously, they're on site at the moment with a certain amount. But
You're dropping. I appreciate
Okay.
dropping down into detail. What I'm
Right.
trying to get to fundamentally, if we've got an overall lack of supply, how much supply of housing do you think we need?
Well, the indicators that's the stuff that we produce, which is the SSHI, the social housing indicators, set a range of for 2023 to 2027, 1,500. I think it's 1,564, something like that, units. So roughly 300 a year. As an indicator, it's not a target. It's an plus or minus, all that sort of thing.
I'm asking you what you think.
Basically, we want to do as much as we can. We're not going to scratch near 300 a year completions. It's just from a standing start, that's very difficult. We're standardly in the island finishing about 120 a year normally, something like that averagely.
So I'm going to throw some.
So we'd like to do more. The point, I think, like you'll have heard in my podcast, is it's all well and good to bandy numbers around, but we just need to do as much as we possibly can. We're a long way from oversupply.
Yeah, okay. I guess it's very.
So pinning me down on numbers, well, I could give you anything you like.
But if you consider,
what's realistic?
If you consider that the relative price of housing across the Western world over the last 25, 30 years has more than doubled. If you look at price-earnings ratios across all Western jurisdictions, not just Guernsey, but everywhere, it's increased. And housing as an asset, private housing, residential housing, is in scarce supply wherever you are in Western Europe.
Indeed.
Ours is an extreme case of that because we're landlocked.
Yeah.
So therefore, the fundamental issue you have is a lack of supply.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to understand how much undersupply the committee thinks exists, and what task you think. What's your main task? How much do you think we need?
I think it's good. This is going kind of recycling back some of the responses we've given to Deputy Camp's question. The importance is the strategic housing
target?
Indicator is giving a broadly, the requirements. The issue we have fundamentally had for the last several decades has been consistent, and those targets. Indicators per year haven't actually changed. They have been around 300 per year for the last several decades. What we have had is a systematic under-delivery from that market perspective for many, many years. So I think fundamentally the committee's objective is to try to increase the rate of home building. What we cannot give you today, and this goes back to the delivery plan that we were talking previously about, I think some of those details will come through that. Whether we can hit the indicator of 300, I don't know. I think that's highly unrealistic, especially given the labour market supply constraints. But I think what we cannot give you today is exactly how far we can get to and over what time frame. We would very much like to develop those
I hear
details
that,
with
but
the delivery
doing better is a nice objective, but it's not an objective, is it? I mean, that's doing better is an objective. My question is, you talk about affordability. There are houses where I live, going out for 2 bedrooms on the main road, 850,000 quid for 2-bedroom property in St Martin's, where actually I live for the purposes of and it was eye-popping to me, a 2-bedroom property.
Yeah.
Is that affordable? Is that, And in terms of, I've heard you talk about the ratios.
Yeah.
I don't suggest that it's possible to reduce it in the way you've talked in the podcast. That way, the markets don't work like that. But you must have, after 9 months, an idea of the scale of the supply that's going to be required. Never mind the sort of state strategic housing indicators. Yeah, I get that. But as a committee, you've had 9 months. You're about to produce a plan. What's the scale? What's your objective? What's your plan? That you're seeking to achieve.
We will come out with those details, especially through the delivery plan. So I think if you're
roughly,
seeking
what do you think it's
for a
going to
number
be? 9
today,
months. You're going to be publishing it shortly.
it's one of the key priorities for the committee is to publish a delivery plan.
We haven't nailed a specific number. We're particularly starting from, rather than just plucking numbers out of the air, we're looking at, well, what's on the go, what's happening, what's realistic, and we're working through what we feel we can push and facilitate and enable as far as possible. But rather than quoting a specific number, so rather than starting with a number and think, how the hell do we get there, we're looking at practically what's on the ground and happening and what can we do. So we're doing what we can. We've been working on incentives system with developers so we can bring more private housing forward. And obviously we're also working on how we bring more affordable housing forward, as in social housing. So with GHA and with the States Housing, working with developers on States Housing owned land in order to bring those forward as well.
Yeah, okay. That sounds a lot of tinkering, organisation, a lot of micro stuff there.
Well, it's real stuff.
It's real. Then you sort of refer to incentives. What incentives?
So in terms of incentives, one area, for example, there's a whole list, but one of the areas is where brownfield sites is particularly more expensive to develop than a greenfield site, and we want to incentivise people to use what was a brownfield, so it's a disused vinery or something like that. So we are currently working on, with the DPA are working on this as well, and environmental health, in terms of how we minimise the costs of dealing with what is low-level contamination. Because some developers and builders are giving us feedback that they're having to scrape off a lot of the site. It's costing a huge amount of money. It makes it uneconomic, and they're not going and developing brownfield sites when there's a greenfield opportunity as an alternative. So these are incentives to get the right sites developed that have been zoned and are currently a bit of an eyesore.
Okay, ex-greenhouse sites you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
What specific incentives are you looking at there then?
So to assist with the contamination costs, so in terms of what we would be doing is, it's practical stuff here, but rather than tipping it, is moving it around and putting it underneath properties and roads and things like that, and then having a register of where it is. But it's low level in terms of that contamination, because it might be just lead or broken glass or things like that. So there's a certain amount of sifting, things like this, but we're trying to avoid the tipping costs and all the carting them around the island in lorries, which helps to reduce the overall costs on the site.
And that would bring how many sites into...
Sorry?
How many potential sites would that bring into play?
There are quite a few, and actually a number of the IDP review sites are actually old greenhouse sites, and there are a number of existing ones that are zoned around the island as well. So I couldn't give you an exact number, but there's a lot.
But, and again, this is the economist in me. I'm sort of saying, okay, that's a really jolly good idea. About time somebody sorted out the greenhouses. I've been here, been at chamber dinners and whatever, and IOD conferences where they talk about greenhouses, and everyone rolls their eyes about the problems that we've got in Guernsey. What scale of the problem do you think that would mitigate? Do you think, are we talking about that would increase supply by 10% per annum, or it would increase? What contribution do you think that particular measure would make?
Yeah, I think it could be anywhere around 10%, because there are sites that are just sat there doing nothing, that they are not economic at the moment. So it's areas like that. I'm thinking about some of the other incentive areas that we've got as well, because we've got a list. Obviously the planning process we were working people on, contaminated I've mentioned. We're trying to assist people in sort of master planning and bringing things forward. Also the larger sites, we're now talking about possible agreements, or which we wholly support, about agreements where they might sign on the bigger sites with the landowner developer in order to give sufficient time and effort to then speed that along, because it's going to make a material impact to the island in terms of the housing supply. So that's new in terms of that proposal. And yeah, the different delivery vehicles that we might be able to use ourselves. So certainly joint ventures that we've not done before. Certainly that I'm aware of that the states have done because we've relied on GHA, but we need to supplement what they're doing as well because we need the additional accommodation. So
Okay, well,
we're generally working on a lot of practical things to try to bring more homes forward.
They are, I mean, look, well, let's come to delivery vehicles, but I'll make a comment. But they are, in the main, small-scale measures that you're talking about. And the hope is, if I'm going to paraphrase you, that the cumulative improvement of small-scale measures will make a big-scale improvement.
Yeah,
Is that your hope?
Exactly. So to some extent, it's not seismic, throwing a bomb. It's trying to work on a whole range of fronts to then cumulatively bring a bigger impact forward. I think the one big area for us that can really assist the market in the island is developing the Brae de Val. So because you've got the Lille's Yard, you've got Kenilworth Vinery, and you've got the salt pan site. So sorting out the infrastructure and getting homes starting to be built there will have a material impact to the island in terms of affordability and supply of homes, because that's not tinkering, that's bigger scale. But that's going to take time. So in the meantime, we need to be working on the other things whilst we're waiting for the Brae de Val to come forward, but also the IDP review sites, the partial review sites, where there are 7, for example, affordable housing sites zoned. Then we need to be coming forward with those in order to deliver some homes out of those, because they've got less complications, particularly on infrastructure.
Okay. I mean, I'm conscious of time. The delivery mechanism, so if I just to paraphrase it again for you more, in terms of that improvement, just because it's 7 million you were talking about, we want to be doing things better. If you could achieve, and I'll say it's like a 30 to 40% improvement over the long run average, that would be a material improvement, would it not?
I'll be absolutely delighted, yeah.
That would be, you want to speak? Go on.
Yeah, I think looking at, so if you actually look at the current land allocated for housing and the number of applications we've got in the pipeline, that is enough to suit the demand of housing. The issue we're facing is that those applications are not coming through. So unlocking those applications, 10, 20, 30, 40% of those applications, working with developers. And this is where I think those joint venture development mechanisms will be absolutely transformational, which will shift the needle very substantially. Can we give you a number today, 10%, 20%? No, I know you're seeking a number, but this is exactly what we want to develop. But we are working side by side, so we're not making things up. We're looking what is actually possible based on site-specific data, the densities of that data, the mix of the sites of what's possible, so we can actually be very concrete and specific of what is deliverable where. Okay.
If we're sort of saying that we're starting off from a base of around 1,500 homes too few, how does that get us? Because if you're saying there's enough planning developments to sort of solve our problems, does that mean we get to break even? Or does that mean we actually get to sort of positively improving our market? Because we are starting from a deficit of 1,500, aren't we? So how does that sort of work in the fullness of your plans?
I mean, I think it's cumulative in terms of the need, and new households are being formed and people are leaving home and wanting a home themselves, all that sort of thing. So it's not like one day suddenly you've solved it. It continues on, but and the indicator was 1,500, so there's about 100, so that's 300 a year averagely. There's about 120 being built, say, averagely. So, okay, we've got a deficit of 180 per annum there. So what can we do? And again, we're drilling into all those sites, that some of which have been sat there. And ultimately, where I'd like to get to, from a planning point of view, is we zone land, but if it doesn't come forward to develop, we de-zone it. There needs to be some, as well as incentives, we're looking at penalties. And we'd like to incentivise people to work and build homes, but if they won't, then we've got to look at the penalties. So, I mean, there's already actions being taken about derelict hotels and disused sites, and we're seeing a lot more proactive action by the states now in terms of trying to take some action on those people that are just sat there with assets that appear to be able to afford to leave them. But we actually need some homes. We don't want just zoned land.
Ultimately, the indicator is a state-approved indicator of the need, and the way its methodology has been developed, and it's been an in-house project led by the previous Committee for E&I and Data Analysis. So it's an in-house tool that takes into account quite a lot of different data sources, and ultimately represents the need as we understand today. So it is, in terms of that, whether it's a target or indicator, is the most important figure we need to work to. Whether we can achieve it over what time frame is what we need to solve as a committee together, working with industry on that.
That's the indicator. I mean, look, when two-bedroom properties in St Martin's brand new are over 800,000 quid, and when there are 1,500 houses short, when people are leaving the island because they can't afford to buy somewhere, where people can't afford, there aren't any rentals on the market, the fundamental increase in supply. My concern is that a bit of tinkering around the edges might not touch the sides. And I'm hoping, and we'll come to the sort of the big ticket where you're saying about that will be enough. But in the general case of building houses, it's land, it's building materials, and it's labour. And the fundamentals of the economics on this island are against us here. You've not mentioned any of those.
Well, they are obviously a topic that we discuss. Some are easier to influence than others. Land value is an influence through the zoning of the affordable housing land in the IDP review, on the basis that if those sites are zoned for affordable housing, the only buyer is effectively States Housing or GHA in terms of provision of affordable housing. And there is an opportunity, therefore, to get a lower than normal land value in terms of the landowner cannot expect full residential value because they're not going to get full residential sales market on those sites. It's a majority of affordable, so it's going to be a mix. But effectively, it suppresses the land price, which helps to subsidise and therefore keep costs down. It reduces the capital subsidy that goes in from the states, from the taxpayer, which helps. And then obviously you're in control of trying to provide what the affordable rented, what the rents are in terms of their affordability, and also the first-time buyer package that might be there in terms of how those are pitched as well.
My apologies, I haven't been keeping track of the IDP process. In terms of zoning for affordable housing, is that a concrete proposal that's going to be in the new IDP?
So it's in the partial review at the moment. So the review that's gone out.
So the proposal itself has gone. Is a new proposal that's gone into this version of the IDP?
Yeah. So yeah.
And so those landowners that may be effective will be as yet.
No, they were asked.
It's not a new proposal. That was fundamental from the beginning of the IDP review. That's effectively the land that was put forward through the call for sites.
There's no land
to be
yet presently zoned for that. It's in the process.
In the partial
to be
review,
agreed.
the 7 sites identified for affordable housing, the owners know.
Okay.
They were asked. Sorry, by new, I didn't know how new you meant. But so they're new to Guernsey. But during this process, which has now been ongoing on this partial review for about 2 years, because it started under the previous DPA, when there was a call for sites from landowners, they were aware that they would only be put forward for affordable housing, and if they weren't interested, they withdrew, of which some did and some didn't. And so the 7 remaining sites, those owners know they are zoned for a majority of affordable housing.
Or to be zoned, yeah.
To be potentially, yes.
And they'll have the opportunity to appeal, will they, or that?
Well, it will come to the states as a policy letter, which could be amended, etc. So it will be a final states debate.
And there will be a look at whether, if they decide to withdraw at any stage, then what happens, are there reserves and all that sort of thing as well.
So in a nutshell, that is an economic lever that you might be looking to utilise for
Correct.
For what I'd call social housing.
So that lowers land cost and that helps with the overall economics. In terms of the other points you mentioned, building materials is very difficult in terms of trying to get costs down. We're a small island. We struggle with economies of scale. Transporting everything in is expensive. Costs have gone up post the pandemic dramatically throughout the building industry. Obviously levelling off largely, but they rocketed and haven't come down. They've just stayed high. And one area in particular is, for example, that everyone always mentions is concrete, because there's only really one source of concrete in the island. I think if we looked at a rather large site, then there's the potential for a concrete batching plant, for example, to provide a bit more competition in the market if, for example, the Bradeval happened. In terms of labour, there's been a reduction in the number of people working in the construction sector post-pandemic. So I think a lot of people had a relook at their quality of life and issues and everything else, and during the pandemic, with the time off from work, or not able to do very much because you were working in people's homes and all that sort of thing. So construction was impacted quite dramatically. We lost quite a lot of people from the island who were here on shorter term contracts. Post-Brexit, they didn't come back. There's been quite a shake-up in the construction market, and it has reduced overall capacity in the island. And hence, I think we've got a greater dependency to bring people in to supplement our industry, because if any of us try to get any work done, it takes a while to get it done. I'm sure there's lots of people with that experience in the room.
Can I just mention, in terms of building materials, that's very essential to what actually the committee is trying to do. And we've got 2 committee members which are also in economic development, and that is very much a key part of the economic development mandate, especially in relation to increasing trade with France, which is very much focusing around building materials being a very core active area. And Deputy Humphreys leads on that piece of work at economic development, and obviously we've got the direct interface into the Committee for Housing. So even though we didn't mention it previously, this is actually quite an important part of what we're trying to do in engaging with the building industry to understand can we lower the cost of building materials.
Yeah, just for information, all individual members of the committee have all got leads on certain issues. So just for clarity, Deputy Collins leads on the homelessness side, Deputy Doherty leads on the private rental market, Deputy Humphreys leads on the first-time buyer area, and is our committee finance budget oversight person, and joint oversight on construction matters, and Deputy Councillor Miller as Vice President and also President of another committee is quite busy, but also her past knowledge of the housing requête and the mandate is extremely helpful, and obviously also has joint oversight on the construction sector issues. Okay. So we've tried to split the responsibilities and improve the amount of scrutiny, monitoring and pushing for action.
Okay, well, I'm going to suggest we'll cover off some of those points.
Sure.
I don't think we've decided to cover off all of them. After I'm looking at the time, we usually take a break. Right, so I'm looking at my colleagues here. I'm going to suggest then we take an early break now, because I think that you've mentioned it before, the Brave development, it's almost like seems to be your central. You're putting a lot of chips on red on this one, I think, but that seems to be your yeah. But but I'll come to the question: how big an opportunity do you need? I'd like you to still have a thought about that issue, and then we'll cover off after that. We've got a few topics we are going to cover off: housing association, key worker, and open market, first-time buyers and rentals. Mm-hmm. But they're micro things. Sure. So thank you very much for that. And again, in terms of where you're coming from, I think I understand. I've listened to the podcast statement. You're looking at a lot of small-scale micro interventions in the hope that it will. And in the macro sense, other than social housing, that we're sort of you don't seem to have any particular levers there, other than this large-scale development site, which we'll come to after the break.
Yeah, I think having talked to some people, they prefer the fact that we're not trying to rip everything up and shake the entire market up, because that has repercussions or unforeseen consequences. It's a small market, and even small things in the Guernsey market can affect quite a lot of people. So I think we have to be careful in what we do.
Traditionalists, I think you could do with 15 to 20% more housing in the next 5 years, and that the only thing that would arrest the price in the long run, but that's an economist speaking. Okay, we'll take a break very quickly.
How long?
10 minutes only, and then we'll cover off those, rattle through that long list. Thank you. Very good. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're going to inject a little bit of pace into the second half because I think we are actually going to run short of time if we're not careful. And I will sort of try and get people to keep their answers a bit shorter and sweeter. But with no further ado, I'll move over to my right, and Deputy McKenna's got a couple of questions on Leal's Yard, or what you're calling Bray Duval. Yes.
Sure. So talking about Leal's Yard, you know, I know you said you're going to be hot on, you know, disused sites, or people are hanging on to planning permissions. Yeah. So where are we with Leal's Yards as regards, say, site preparation or infrastructure planning, or what's the delivery time for housing on Leal's Yard?
On Leal's Yard specifically, well, we're not got a committee involvement other than I'm on the political oversight board with Deputy DeSamray and Deputy Gabriel. And its SPU are managing it on a day-to-day basis under PNR, because it was acquired under PNR.
Would it be easier if it was through your committee, do you think?
I think because it's majority housing, it's mixed use. I accept that, but because it's a majority housing, I think it would, because frankly, it affects our mandate significantly in terms of housing supply. So yes, I do. This is the situation we've inherited, because obviously prior to the Housing Committee being formed, PNR had obviously agreed to go forward to purchase it. It was acquired obviously in August, but the decision had obviously already been made last term.
So that where we are. So back to this question.
Sure.
Sorry.
Okay.
In terms of timing and cost.
Yeah. So when do you expect construction to begin?
So from what I've seen in terms of from the political oversight board, is that there is progress being made in terms of going out to tender on the demolition. So there's the procurement process that the states has to go through for tendering, which they normally have to go through. They've been going through that, and they are gearing up now to start to look to, I think the time they will have chosen the demolition contractor hopefully is going to be about June, July.
Sorry, Deputy Williams, who's they?
Sorry, SPU. So States Property Unit are dealing with the day-to-day management of the site in terms of bringing it forward. And I understand because of bird nesting season and all those sort of the ecology things, effectively the contractor won't be able to actually physically start demolition until September. But that's the target, is to start the demolition in September, to clear the site and entrance into the site as well.
What about public realm?
And in terms of in what
developing
respect?
The access and
so in terms of the access, where it currently comes off the roundabout on the north side, that building will need to come down to create an access in. So I think there's likely to be a planning application for that demolition.
Just two quick questions. When would you hope the first units would be completed?
Completed?
Yeah.
For people to live in?
No, that's what I'm saying. Just as a.
Well, I think realistically, when you look at the Leal's Yard, I try and keep this succinct, but if you've looked at the what effectively got the currently what is a detailed outline planning, there's 4, 5, 6-story blocks. They're all built into blocks, into apartment blocks. You've got to get the whole thing finished in order to get somebody to live in it. It's the practicalities of health and safety and living in that sort of thing.
Imagine we've all seen construction sites. Your
that's going to take some time. No, I'm just saying that's going to take some time. It's different to a little 2-story house.
Yeah.
So that's probably going to be about 3, maybe 4 years away before someone's actually living in it, I suspect.
So it might not even be.
Bearing in mind you've got roads, you've got drainage, infrastructure for the whole site.
Okay. So maybe 2030, not even this decade.
I mean, one hopes, but I'm just trying to be realistic on the fact that if I said you 2 years, it wouldn't be right.
I think one of the fears that for yourselves will be the contamination of the soil. So, are you hoping to build mainly on top and sort of almost concrete over the problem? Or what's your? No, but it's not a trick question.
No.
Saying, you've had decades and decades of people basically but
I think I'm not been privy to the detail on it, other than in a previous life I did look at the surveys that have been done then. There are further surveys being done, and they're underway now on the site in terms of contamination. I think principally it is hydrocarbons, where people have been doing work on cars. There's been spillages of diesel fuel and all sorts of stuff, waste oil thrown away. There may be localised areas of that sort of level of contamination. I don't think it's severe, but there will be localised areas of it. So that needs to be cleared up and tidied up and potentially scraped away, because I don't think it's the entire site by any means.
That's a good point. I didn't think of that.
What's that?
No, I didn't think that. It could actually be just
Correct.
certain sites. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
If Leal's Yard became problematic with those little things having to be overcome, do you have any other major sites in the pipeline?
So obviously the rest of it, in terms of the salt pans and the Kenilworth, which currently sit with GHA, but States Property Unit are working very closely with them. I think there will be an ideal to be able to start. The ideal scenario will be to start from the route militaire angle as well and work in. And I think it will be quicker from that end of the site, because it's lower rise housing and more modest, and therefore we'll be able to get, ideally we'll be able to get people into properties quicker as well.
The reason I asked you about the major sites is because again, it's another development in the north of the island.
Sure.
So I should have really structured the question different, because they're saying, there's not a blade of grass left in the Brady Vowel, or the next one to put the kettle on down the Brady Vowel is going to put the lights out in the whole of St Sampson. So, have you got anything in the west, or you got anything in the south?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Mallard is 85 properties that has been given planning, which is obviously at the Mallard in the forest. So that's happening. And there are other sites spread around the island that are coming forward.
Yes, so I think we've got the Tyres Yard, we've got Mallard, that's the immediate sites coming through. We've got the 7 IDP sites, which have been carefully chosen to be across the whole of the island. Within that, in addition to that, the Cattell King Edward Hospital, that's actually a very substantial development area, so probably one of the larger sites that's coming through. But the timeline for delivery, most of it might not be in the next 3 to 5 years, might be 5+, but some of it could be delivered. But then some of the other sites, I think, quite important to mention are Levrang Petronary sites. That's probably one of the largest sites. That's St Pete's Port, and also you've got St Martin's Hotel.
So in terms of but come back to the Bray and about the major, because you mentioned it several times beforehand, in terms of because in terms of that whole timeline for that development.
Yeah.
And again, I hear what you're saying, Deputy Miller, Associate Secretary Miller, in terms of the other sites. I mean, a couple of them are all GHA sites, they're Infinity sites, whatever. But in terms of this particular area, the Kenilworth, the Leals, what's the time scale for development now? And my question is, if you're looking at Leals being 4 or 5 years, what's stopping you looking at Kenilworth first?
What's stopping looking at?
Bringing forward the Kenilworth first.
I think, because it's in the middle, I think it's probably easier to come in from the road access points, from the bridge and from route militaire inwards. But
so you're going to do
Kenilworth is in the middle.
It's a master planning exercise.
And so
right?
there's master planning on.
It takes years, in my experience, doesn't it?
Well, there's the consultant's going to be, States Property Unit are taking people on to do the infrastructure, as in the roads. Well, it's quite large scale. In terms of doing that, so they need to be designed in order then that we can work with developers or developer to look at the whole thing. But actually, we've done the preparatory work in terms of the roads, the drainage. There is an issue on the drainage side of things because of the capacity of that sort of size area. In order that, and also in making sure the lights don't go out.
Okay, so that's quite an involved exercise there.
Well, there is, yeah. It's inevitably, it's quite large, but there are other sites in the area, as Deputy Councillor Miller mentioned, which is things like the Verong and the Coutonche, which are being master planned at the moment as well by the landowners.
Okay, so in terms of delivery vehicles, then obviously Leals was an interesting one. Deputy Camp's got some questions with respect to that, because I got the sense that you aren't wedded to any particular one, but from your podcast, I'm
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So clearly a lot of this is reliant upon housing associations, whether that's a GHA or another vehicle.
Yeah.
So how are you managing the relationship with those housing associations generically to ensure that those development programmes align with the strategic housing requirements and housing delivery plans?
Sure. We met with GHA yesterday afternoon, actually, and we picked up on some of those issues. And they've got to a point where I've just had information that they've been talking to. They've had a board meeting today, and they feel they've got to a point where they've got some figures agreed with the contractor for the tyre site, which is very positive. That information having been through.
I don't want to talk about what the housing association have plans to. I think we'll talk about the relationships that you.
All right. Okay, so we're keen to promote obviously affordable housing through GHA. So there's active conversations with them on a number of sites, but also we are looking at the prospect of, rather than bringing in yet another association, see the economies of scale of dragging yet another one in and starting them off, and the whole setup business is we have a state's housing team, and we've not really involved Ed so far in this conversation, and it seems a shame that he's sat here and not involved. But Ed oversees the state's housing team. We obviously currently have 1,650 state's housing properties. We've got the maintenance team, the management team. We can develop with developers to create what be rented accommodation, and that can be then maintained and managed by our existing staff.
Yeah,
so we're keen to explore that area, and we're currently looking at infill sites within our estates.
It was
to try and
interesting
do that.
kind of what you meant by that, having listened to the podcast, because I think I suppose my understanding of the GHA is its purpose is to build homes. I think it's sort of transitioned perhaps more into a property management vehicle, probably because of the volume, but it's now built. So what's I suppose how does that relationship evolve? Because property, and then you talk about states, the states then having property management to relieve economies of scale, but you don't necessarily talk about the construction element of using housing associations. So I think what I'm trying to understand is how are housing associations going to be utilised to ensure we're still building whilst also maintaining those properties, because we've ended up in a two-pronged problem for ourselves potentially, as seems to be exhibited at the GHA.
I'm seeing it now as possibly, or we, as two solutions. That we get affordable housing built by GHA, great, and they continue. They've got their business plan. There's limits as to what they can afford to do in terms of new build because it's expensive. You ratchet up more loans and debts. They've obviously got their existing stock to maintain and look after. But we've also got an ability to talk with developers and contractors on sites that are there where we might assist. So we're buying completed units at agreed prices.
So you talk about commissioning the private sector to develop properties.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. So we're not actually going to be employing the architects and all the rest of it. We will let the developer do what they do best, which is design things up. We will have an input because we want a certain design, we want a certain mix of units and certain specification. We'll have prices that we feel we can afford that are sensible for the taxpayer. And it might be that if it's on a piece of our land, we put the land value in, but we're getting the reciprocal benefit of completed units back. Equivalent.
Yeah.
So,
I wanted to ask
so effectively, sort of two-pronged, really.
Yeah, I wanted to ask how realistic that is as a prospect, because your point before around zoning for affordable housing is that there's really only one purchaser, and so the value that can be obtained from that reduces. Now, the same obviously happens if a developer is producing homes with only one buyer, is you don't have a specific market value, and perhaps developers would be more likely to chase private market value. Yeah. So how does that work in reality? Because I struggled with the concept.
It locks in better where either we own the land or we control it in some shape or form. And the benefit for them, obviously, cash flow wise, normally is that you end up paying stage payments throughout. So it helps their cash flow because they're used to having to stick a load of money in at the front and waiting until So
Yeah.
for a number of them, and I know we shouldn't get the violins out here, but because the cost of building has gone very high, and actually, interestingly, house prices have plateaued, if not slightly dipped, for the last 3 years when you look at the data. There's a squeeze at the moment on profitability for developers, allegedly. That's what they're saying. So a number of them are thinking, well, if we can get steady work with you,
It's de-risking.
yeah, absolutely.
That pipeline.
Yeah, so that's but I agree with you. Otherwise, if it's a normal spec site where they can flog it for whatever values, then they're not necessarily going to be coming to us. Also, we're going to be paying a very high price.
And
So,
given,
yeah.
so also, so I suppose, so given there have been constraints in the construction market,
Yeah.
how does this sort of unlock those capacity constraints? Because they don't just automatically resolve themselves.
Yeah, I think the market is responsive to changes in the market, and we've clearly seen we've got rock coming into Guernsey, and that's been through natural procurement process that states have been leading, but also you now see builders like developers like Groupe Legendre from Brittany coming in. So first of all, I think also believing in market forces and that some of those adjustments will be natural is important. But having said that, once we understand that we need more capacity in the construction sector, as we're seeing that pipeline be clarified through the delivery plan, we need to be actively working to see, well, how we're going to source enough capacity to be able to deliver against the house building program. And the wider states will have similar conversations in terms of the delivery of the overall capital program. So I think as the states, we need to have a much better view in terms of what's that demand on the construction industry going forward. Yeah. And I think that's a joint piece of work that we need to be working together with, obviously, the Committee for Housing, but also Economic Development, PNR, to have that combined view.
I must admit, I don't like the answers where the present participle and the future tenses are used, because you've got capacity constraints now.
Yeah.
You're talking about bringing people in. The straightforward answer is we're going to have to bring more people in or something like that. We're going to have to expand the capacity in some way, shape or form. Is the straightforward answer. I mean, we know that, and it's already happened. And to be fair to the GHA, yes, the two of the sites you mentioned, the tyres and they're joint with Affinity, but you are talking about commissioning states, private sector developers. Is that primarily going to be on stateless land? Because obviously with the GHA, again, a lot of that was we had to give the land to them to make the things economic.
Yeah.
And do you have when you come back to the powers of the committee, do you have the mandate to do that? Have you got the levers in place to be able to make that happen in a short enough timescale to make a difference?
I believe we have, yes. I think we have got that mandate.
As the committee?
Yeah, and obviously it'd be something we'd be going through with PNR in terms of the proposals. But it's either going to be on our land or land we control in some shape or form, potentially those affordable housing zoned sites in the IDP review. Again, because, as you mentioned, Deputy Camp, they are controlled in terms of the user being either the housing association or states housing or another. I mean, it could be that we end up attracting another housing association in if we need to, if we feel we need to. So that is still there, but I think it's just potentially another complication that at the moment I'd probably try to avoid.
We're going to change topics now, so we can bump through this. I must admit, I'm not entirely sure you are, because I think the land you'll find, we just had the conversation, it's the states property unit, which is PNR. So how are you going to resolve that issue with the use of land? So I think you need to be thinking through those practicalities on that point. But in two areas, we're talking about affordability, and what people haven't covered off, we've been talking about social housing, we've been talking about affordable housing, but private housing, cheaper private housing for people to actually buy and aspire to. I've heard you talk about the town centre and the need to maybe build up or utilise the properties that we've got.
Yeah.
What are you planning to do, both in terms of private properties, in private purchases and private rentals? What's the plans there?
In terms of standards or supply or...
Supply?
I mean, we talked about the landlord-tenant roles and responsibilities, so I won't
I
cover that
don't see how that's going to be called much.
In terms of supply, we are interested in, and I don't think there's been very much on this in terms of the build-to-rent market and getting institutional investors involved. So it's on our action plan. We've not got very far with it. It's an area that we need.
It is the most pressing issue of the housing market, isn't it? Rental price.
Yeah, well, there's lots of pressing issues, but that's an area that we are keen to explore. We also feel that setting out the roles and responsibilities for tenants and landlords sets a more professional platform for any institutional investors getting involved as well. So that's on our radar to push. In terms of other supply, we obviously want to keep as many of the existing landlords in the market. And we've been having regular meetings with the Private Landlords Association, some of whom say, well, because of certain concerns, some people are leaving the market. We don't know how accurate some of that is, but we want to retain the people we've already got and ideally add more. And there's also something else that we've been that's coming through the DPA, which is about dower units. So currently, the existing dower units, a number of them are not occupied because,
how many?
Well, classically, the stats aren't there because they're not separated out as an individual property. But anecdotally, we know people with them. So it'll be interesting to see
Well,
what
it's
the
on Digimap, isn't it? Somebody go through the dower units on Digimap.
well, you don't know if they're occupied or not. So what we're talking about is unoccupied. So currently, what you can do is have a family member and you can't charge a rent.
Any idea? Is it thousands? Is it hundreds? Is it scores?
So we've tried to pin this down, and there aren't the stats available because no one's combed around to say, have you got your dower unit empty or not? And of course, because they're lapped in with the cadastre and the TRP and everything of their main property, it's hard to know. So without snooping around individual people's properties, we don't honestly know. But anything helps. If we do 30 or 40,
obviously it does.
It's existing properties. If it's at 30 or 40, that's 30, 40 households housed. So what we're planning to, well, the DPA are going to bring forward to the States very soon is a proposal that those can be rented out to non-family members. So there's obviously going to be some caveats to it, but that's the proposal, and that will add a bit more stock.
I hear that. That's good.
That exists. We don't have to build it.
But the rental property market has the price have increased, 60% in the last 5 years?
Yeah.
That is a serious supply issue, serious scale. And dower units, I don't think, are going to touch the size of that issue.
No, again,
So
it's another one of those issues.
It is a big issue. It's the main reason why people sort of move off island. They've got nowhere to rent. They, basically call it a day. I'm hoping here that there's some sort of idea of what that approach is going to be to help increase supply for that market.
Well, we keep talking about the approach that we are taking in terms of side-by-side, talking with landlords, especially with private markets, permissions and understanding where those barriers are. And those conversations are leading directly to those landlords or developers. And they are very much focused on unlocking private sector development, which will then obviously translate into some private market ownership. But some of the units built will go to rental as well. So maybe officers and Claire especially have been participating in those conversations.
The approach of talking to people.
They're essential to unlocking private supply. And I know we keep returning to that point, but ultimately we need to work with the land and developers that's available there, because that's where those units will be unlocked.
The other issue is in the roles and responsibilities of landlords and tenants. We're proposing in the policy paper at the moment that there is some rent increase controls in terms of...
Oh, rent controls.
In terms of... Don't put it quite like that. Put it more, some elements of, in terms of perhaps and this is in the policy paper, but it's not gone forward yet, that a once a year rent increase and something similar to RPI. But we've got some work to do on that.
I keep these thoughts to myself, but I can't. You will not find one issue that is more, you will find more unanimity amongst economists that rent controls do not increase supply. But we'll move that to one side. So the reason why I get fixated on numbers, because we were talking about the Leals Yard, and if we're improving by the 20-30% of supply, or 10-20% of supply, and the Leals Yard and the developments, the big picture, don't appear for 5 years, the cumulative undersupply, increase in undersupply, is about 600 properties, which is why the scale of things that we're looking at. And they're talking to people and bringing things forward in a small scale is not going to solve that. We'll come back to numbers and objectives to recap in a minute. We've got a couple of other areas that we haven't touched on. We have key worker housing. I think we sort of semi-touched on that, but if my colleagues have got any more questions on that. What are you doing with respect to the open market? I acknowledge I live in the open market too. It's not a particular conflict of interest. It's not a special interest. But I'm asking you, in terms of the open market, have the committee got any thoughts or views or plans?
Yeah, I mean, we've so obviously, as you know, the legislation was passed on the open market proposal on the new inscriptions, and we've so there's been some activity on that. Do you want to elaborate on what's happened post the legislation going through?
Yeah, so the commencement, the legislation was agreed by the states, but there was one part of the legislation that wasn't commenced. So everything else was commenced, which allowed for transfers of open market inscriptions on development properties and for downsizing, for example, and for cultural buildings. You saw the Vale Mill come through the media, and that got its open market inscription, which has meant that preserves that. The bit that wasn't commenced was the brand new inscription. So a limited number of brand new inscriptions each year is allowed for in the legislation, but the committee needed more time to be able to look at what's the appropriate mechanism to actually award those limited number of inscriptions. Obviously, there's quite a lot of value associated with the award of an inscription. Yes, there's a fee associated with that, but it was quite important that there was a robust system put in place to allow that to happen. And the committee have been working towards what's the best way for that. It's decided what it thinks is the best way, so it's an operational decision, but it will need the legislation being put into place and then commence to allow that part of the law to come forward.
So we'll be coming to the states, won't we?
Yeah.
With the policy and
with
the legislation
to allow that bit to be enacted.
Yeah.
And hopefully reasonably soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I could just ask, I apologise if you've already answered this question. So, key worker housing, how many have been approved at the moment, or how many are in the planning process for key worker housing?
We don't actually run the key worker housing on a day-to-day basis currently. We're in discussions with P&R and States Property Unit, who obviously oversee it. So in terms of, you mean new key worker homes?
Well, just for example, yeah,
Or
like new
employee
key worker housing. How many's under construction?
I'm not aware. We don't have that data, and we're not, on a day-to-day basis in control and oversight of it. I know there are plans for some accommodation potentially on the PEH campus, and there are 15 obviously under construction at the Oberlands. That GHA are working with Infinity, and that's opposite the entrance there to the hospital.
But of course, that then brings me back when we started at about 2:00, and we said, when you've got the Duchess of Kent, you could have 100 nursing staff put in there at just the cost of like a refurbishing of the Duchess of Kent. Because the Duchess of Kent historically, I think we've talked about this before, historically did have 100 patients in there when it was a home. I know because I used to work in there about 30 years ago, as well as working on the Cattell Hospital site. I worked there 30 years ago. So that's why I'm saying Duchess of Kent. So instead of saying how much are we going to cost the states or how much money have we got to find to build new, that building, the Duchess of Kent, with a refurb, there's 100 units available for you at any time.
The key worker accommodation element in terms of provision, obviously P&R employed, the staff are employed under P&R. That responsibility was not transferred to us at the point the Housing Committee was set up. We've had some dialogue in the last few days because it's been a concern of ours. So we've had some dialogue in the last few days with P&R and the States Property Unit in terms of getting a lot more actively involved in terms of how that's proceeding. So that's not sat with us.
That mandate to be a bit more broad. I mean, you're enabling. You remember that you're empowered.
I think it's broad enough, but potentially, but certain areas, I think, just from an operational point of view, were held onto by SPU and P&R.
Sorry, just to go back onto sort of the rental side, because I saw obviously in the press that the committee had made comment on the review into rental allowances, which is an area that Scrutiny is very interested in. And just want to ask about, obviously we're talking about controls, potentially rent controls, but what given there's an observance that the effect of rental allowances from the state has had an inflationary impact on the rental market, what is the Housing Committee's views around how we can how the Housing Committee can safeguard that moving forward, given it clearly chose to comment on its concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I think we generally feel, I think like a lot of people do in the island, that it is inflationary, and obviously if landlords are picking and choosing, depending on who turns up at their door, as to whether they've got a rental allowance or not, then that distorts the market and is unfair to local people who don't have access to that. It's obviously a challenge because we still need to recruit and retain certain people and certain skills in the island. It's not a simple one. It's something that we can certainly comment on. It's not something that has been really under our control or influence because we've not been in charge of that mandate.
Do you have an intention to maybe formally raise your concerns with policy and resources?
We have, and so when we had the different meetings with senior corporate services leaders, we raised it at the very beginning to say this is an area of particular concern and interest, so we would like to be updated. So we would very much like to understand the outcomes of the report that we understand the PNR have received and would like to be updated on that work. Yeah.
Directly, the issue is the rent allowances went up from 2 years to 4 years in what, 2021, was it, something like that? And basically you just saw the spike in the rentals. I mean, like I've done the maths, I've done the econometrics, it's there. So would you support reducing
that only issue, or were there other issues?
No, you can see it. I'll give you the T-stats if you want. But you do the dummy variable regression and you've control for other factors. But would you support, if that was the case, bringing the rent allowance back to 2 years to help reduce rental prices?
I think what's important is an indication whether there are proper checks and balances around the allocation of rent allowances, whether they're needed. We've certainly heard about...
Let's assume that they are, for the sake of argument, but would you agree with reducing it from 4 years to 2 years to help reduce rents?
I mean, classically, we're not the employer of those people. And so
I'm asking you as a housing committee.
Yeah, OK. I mean, I think probably the shorter period is right, but obviously then HSC or who've got the bulk of those staff are going to say, hang on a minute, all those people that you need when you're in hospital to look after you might not be here after 2 years. So there are repercussions for all these things. So inevitably, nothing's simple. And if it was, it would have been solved.
If it were so, we wouldn't have a supply problem, would we?
Precisely. All sorts of issues. But so something needs to be done to try and recruit and retain. But we also need a fair system as possible across the island for local people and people coming in as well. It's how that's done. So maybe that's something you can feed into as an economist.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the long run, you need to reduce it, but in the short run, you're going to have problems doing it. Yeah. So in terms of rentals, is there any other...
No.
Oh.
Well, I'm just saying to say to reduce from 4 to 2 would be problematic because, if you're in the hospital, you may not have what I can tell you, the full-on is full of people that cannot be replaced. So there'll always be a supply from somewhere. And in that case, if we were so fearful of replacing health and social care professionals, we'd say, why don't we make it a 10-year allowance because you don't want to lose them. So that's unfortunately not the case. I think what the President was trying to say is if we reduce the rent allowances to 2 years, it still allows the health and social care professionals here on licence to stay in Guernsey. They just don't enjoy that privilege of being handed free money. And I think what we were trying to say as a committee, and I think we are united on this, instead of talking about relocation packages, how about location packages for locals to stay or be in health and social care? So there's two ways to look at things. Okay.
Well, and I say as somebody that came on the rent allowance, 2 years you have to really find it hard to actually adjust. 4 years you probably leave after 4 years, and I reckon that's what happens.
It was extended post-COVID, wasn't it? So I mean, it's certainly a time to review it, isn't it?
So I'm looking at time there, and I know people sent the mickey out of me for fixating on numbers, but we're going to. I'll say it louder again. But it comes to objectives, and it comes to you've talked about improvements. And you've talked about sort of dower units. And I asked how many, what's the numbers associated with that? And we don't have the data availability. But I do want to come back to. We decided we'd like to speak to housing because we'd like to know what the plans are. And obviously you're proposing to publish a plan shortly. But in 3 years' time, what will success look like for the committee?
Principally, I think reduce waiting lists to what level? Certainly at a very low level, ideally, and we don't have housing issues on the front page all the time. Affordability is far better in terms of renting and prices. How that works out in numbers, we're going to have to come back to you with specific numbers rather than us create something here. But we're 9 months in to having picked up something brand new. We've done
no, the committee's brand new. The problems aren't.
Yeah, no, exactly. But we've had to get to grips with all those issues and all the information, and we are making a lot of progress.
All right.
If you want specific hard and fast numbers, then I think we're going to have to come back to you on that with the delivery plan.
So when do you envisage that delivery plan being in place?
Very good question. Where do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the committee's working towards publishing its work plan by the middle of the year, as directed by the state. And the delivery plan we are working on running alongside, I think it would benefit from having an outcome to the IDP review process so we know what sites are available. Whether we want to publish something tentative and firm that up after some of those decisions have been made, that might be the case. It's months. It's not weeks, it's months, but it's not. It will be this year, absolutely.
So we went from middle of the year to this year?
There are other things in terms of like funding availability. So the major projects portfolio process, that's crucial to our delivery plans in terms of whether we've got the funding available to support investment in affordable housing. So that, I understand, is due for kind of middle of the year.
So you don't sit there, Steve, and say...
Sorry?
So you don't sit there as a president and say, right, my objective for housing for Guernsey, I got elected, I want to make a difference. I hope we can achieve 10% more housing in 10 years.
We need to make a material difference. How material that is, I think we need to agree on what's realistic
could you
and then
define
probably add a
material?
bit more to push ourselves.
I'm hearing lots of good intentions.
Yeah.
I genuinely am. I wish you all the best to British.
We are working bloody hard on this.
I believe you are. But I do want to understand what the people of Guernsey say. As a KPI, I hate to use that phrase, but not having housing that was the front page every now as often as it was a year ago is not a measure of success.
No, I was just giving an example of...
I think it's also not a measure of success to make up numbers. So we are quite serious about coming up with a serious delivery plan that's actually achievable, and we are committed. We are committed to doing that, and we absolutely understand its importance. But what we're not ready to do, which I think we've reiterated several times today, is we're not ready to come up with numbers out of the air because it doesn't help anyone. So we are committed to working based on evidence, based on specific sites, not theoretical policy making, to come up with a deliverable delivery plan. And as Officer said, it's going to be done this year.
And will that delivery, so that delivery plan will have numbers,
Yep.
but also that delivery plan will be based upon what you already know is deliverable. It's not ambitious. So what I'm trying to understand is how is the housing committee successful by only taking on an existing pipeline of development opportunities and delivering that?
No,
that
we'll
doesn't
push
feel
ourselves.
like success.
No, I think we'll push ourselves as well. So we will be going for, with a certain amount of time and effort and emphasis, we can push this. And so we will try and push the boundaries. You've always got to have a target that pushes you. And I've been very delivery focused in what I've done in my past life, as I'm sure the rest of my committee are. And we are focused on delivering as the best outcomes we can for the islands. So we will push ourselves.
Do you have the
we will
levers?
not settle back on what's...
Do you have the levers to do that? Because if you're reliant upon planning and et cetera, what levers do you have to push? What can the Housing Committee do that quite frankly couldn't have been done a year ago by the States of Guernsey?
It's a good question. And we are dependent on other people.
I think we've taken a very different approach in terms of actually focusing on the delivery for site-specific, looking at the combined approach, private, affordable housing. There's a couple of key things that we still need to... Can I just finish? In terms of the funding model of how we're actually going to fund this very ambitious program is absolutely crucial, and how that fits into, do we have taxpayer subsidies for affordable housing, do we not, can we come up with models where actually we substantially reduce that taxpayer subsidy, because it's been extremely high through the historic sites. I don't think as an island we can afford this, especially given the public state of the public finances we've got. So the delivery program, absolutely the levers around the funding model, funding elements will be absolutely key. Working with DPA, working with SPU, but this is exactly what we're trying to develop as part of effectively the delivery plan.
We're talking about present participle, we're talking about future tense. I'm going to push you for a target. What's your target for this term?
We haven't set down a specific target number. We are working things up. We're progressing on a number of fronts, as we've already explained, and we are pushing as hard as we can on those. I think in terms of our delivery plan, we will come concrete with some numbers for you later this year.
Can I just make a demo? I think when we talk about housing delivery, it's not necessarily going to be one type of delivery. It's not one thing that we're looking at. There's quite a few number of different opportunities, and the delivery of those, how we engage with the construction sector, how we fund it, might be different for different, some sites that we, Committee for Housing might administer, might be different from how those IDP allocations come forward in terms of funding and commissioning. So it's not necessarily just one thing. So the plan has to draw.
But I think what we're asking for is what are the measurable outcomes, as opposed to sort of discussions and side by side and thinking and planning. What would be the measurable outcomes of those different delivery mechanisms you're looking at?
I mean, I think we've had to understand the market we're in, where we're at, who the other parties are, because a lot depends on a lot of other parties. We're not building all these homes ourselves, obviously. So, and we've been working through this in terms of, and then it gives us a picture of where we are, what's coming forward, and what difference could we make in terms of trying to up the ante on all of that. And that just takes time to actually come, you can't just pluck a figure out of the air for some of this. There's a lot of variables at play. And we're getting as much information as we can on all these variables to then think, okay, that's a difference we can make, and we'll put that into the delivery plan.
I get it. I appreciate, Steve. Deputy Williams. It's a complicated problem.
It is.
You can describe complicated problems to me to the cows come out. I get that. But the issue is, and about the information. Let me finish. The information is, I go to the Guernsey Housing, the gov.gg site. There's a Guernsey Housing Plan. There's the ARC Limited Guernsey Housing Market Review and Problem Identification Report. There's the ARC 4 Limited Strategic Interventions in the Guernsey Housing Market Report. There's the Guernsey Plan 2024 Annual Update Report. There's the ARC 4 Developing Interventions to Bring Development Site Forwards to Delivery Report. There's the ARC 4 Report Understanding the Appetite and Barriers to Right Sizing in Guernsey Report. It's 9 months in. You're talking about having a delivery plan by the end of the term, by the end of this year, possibly, maybe earlier, which would be 18 months after the election. And the question the people of the public of Guernsey are, what targets, what objectives do you have? Rentals are 60% higher in price than they were 5 years ago. What 2 or 3 things are you looking to do, and what are you hoping to achieve in the next 3.25 years?
I mean, I've said generally that we obviously want to get the affordability,
down.
Things to be more affordable on the renter side. But there's no point in me quoting specific numbers here and now. And we've got more work to do to look at the whole picture in terms of what we are likely to deliver. So, you've requested this scrutiny hearing with us now. It wouldn't have been our choice to have had it now because there's more work for us to do on the delivery side. So we just don't have that information. If you just said, oh, okay, come to us when you've got the delivery plan ready, this meeting would have been a few months further on. We just don't have that information for you now. And otherwise, we're just plucking figures out, which would become meaningless.
My apologies. I did presume, again, it wasn't a trick question, that you would have an objective set. That's all I'm coming from.
I think ultimately the state sets the indicator, and that takes into account a multitude of things, including population increase as well. So what would success look like? Ultimately, it would be to deliver that indicator. And we know there's enough land supply to meet that indicator, and we know there's a pipeline of planning permissions every 2 years that is currently meeting that indicator. So the committee are concentrating on bringing that planning permission side and land supply into completions. So the work through all of those things, informed by all those reports you've said, is working towards turning those planning permissions into completions to ultimately meet what the states have indicated the numbers are required.
And the indicator, this relates to the 1,500 sort of deficit position that we're potentially already in, plus 300 homes per year. So we're talking 2,000 plus
No,
homes.
1,500 is your overall requirement. We're effective, so 300 per year.
Yeah, okay.
And we're delivering 120, so the gap
Yes,
is
the gap is
effectively
maybe
100.
half of it, 800 or so. We're in deficit, definitely. Plus
So
another
success-
900 over the next 3 years.
Well, the indicator is not set up that it's cumulative. So this is one of the questions we asked when we were looking at the indicator. It's not accumulating the deficits that weren't delivered. It's the way it's designed. It's giving you the indicator as is today. We're due to, under the resolution, to be updating the indicator in 27. I think that will be a policy letter that comes to the states. One of the considerations potentially for us and the states is whether we should make it a target, which then actually it becomes a state's target with actually more significant levels of accountability. So perhaps that's something for us to be thinking about. So instead of an indicator, to actually be bringing a housing delivery target.
Yes, it might give more meat to the funding arguments, things like that.
Yeah.
Liam?
I think, not as somebody on scrutiny, I just think I was just hoping that, naively then, that I'd be hit with numbers of houses that, that we're going to be doing. And that's what I'm saying, maybe that's naivety. So it's not trying to trick you or pull you up. It's just, I thought, how many...
I think you're right. There clearly is urgency. I mean, obviously, sitting here with also the President of Economic Development, I sit on Economic Development, and we know that the lack of housing is identified as one of the biggest constraints to economic growth. So there is urgency. There's urgency around whether people invest in coming back home or they just continue their plans not to. So I think there is a disappointment, if I can put it that way, that it takes 18 months to come up with a plan, given we are in a very short political cycle relative to that 18 months. So I think I think what we are looking for is some assurances that there is, there are targets beyond. And I think that's right. I think, a target needs to be set. And it goes back to the sort of questions I was asking before is, what can the Housing Committee do that was different from what the states could have been doing for the last 10, 20 years? Because the Housing Committee was specifically set up to try and sort of free this logjam that had been perceived to have existed prior to its creation.
Yeah, listed a few things in terms of what's different about us, and I think it's a closer focus on the housing issues, which you mentioned earlier, across all the tenures, not just affordable housing, clearer lines of responsibility and oversight, closer political deputy leads and connections to other parties, third parties, in terms of working with third sector, trying to ensure that we make best use of all the skills and financial support in the island, monitoring the state's housing finances, obviously within our own committee, under our own committee. There's been greater attention with St Julian's, making the best use of St Julian's House as well, which is should be emergency accommodation. But
these are things that should have been happening before. I suppose that's the difficulty, isn't it?
Exactly.
So, okay.
but that's another argument, isn't it? But at least we've focused attention on it. It's come out of something rather large, HSC, and we've been able to focus attention on it. So that's a benefit.
And do you believe that your mandate, because you're doing it now while you're at the sort of discussion and planning stage, when you then turn into implementation of planning stage, does your mandate allow for focus, clearer oversight, third sector working? Do you have the right levers and mechanisms to be able to take that forward into implementation phase once you've got out of planning phase?
I believe we do. I mean, in terms of, Sasha, from your knowledge of the previous term and the RECET and where we are now in terms of the implementing that RECET, do you feel that's the case?
I think there is still lack of clarity about roles and responsibilities in relation to state's property unit. I think that's really fundamental. Us working closer with DPA, and you know, Deputy Williams is obviously a member of us, so there are clear interdependencies still, but I would say probably the biggest interdependency is with state's property unit and how that relationship will evolve, and roles and responsibilities in relation to delivery of homes.
I appreciate that, and actually in terms of our that direction, it's sort of matrix management, whatever, who's directing who and whatever is an issue we've identified previously. Mm-hmm. Now I'll come back. Now, my apologies, Deputy Williams. It wasn't meant to be. It's in the same way the Deputy Minister. I just was sort of expecting and was hoping that there to be more of a defined sort of like
sure. No, I understand.
My apologies if it came across a bit more than that.
Yeah.
But and again, if I again paraphrase for you, and I now understand. I understand actually what the Deputy Minister made when you sort of say the objective is to do things better than previously, and in itself is that as an objective because previously you felt that things were working well enough, and so therefore now culturally I can see why that's an objective all in its own right, and I could see where you're saying that collectively we want to do a better job than was being done previously. I get that, and I understand that is probably a cultural mindset of creating a new committee and saying yes, let's do it better than before, and we've now got this coordinating role to be able to do that sort of thing. My concern from a scrutiny perspective is that all of that shouldn't be at the expense of lifting up a bit and looking at more of the big ticket. What are the fundamental issues here in the housing market that need to be addressed in there?
Sure.
Some of the real long scale things, like you said. Now, in terms of the delivery, in terms of the RAL that you talked about, I think from our perspective, our concerns is that you might not have the levers, that the timescales might be too long, so that if you put too many chips on that as resolving our needs, it might not turn out rosy for us all. Because if you look at the cumulative numbers getting worse, this housing indicator, call it a target if you wish, but 1,500 properties over a course of 5 years, if you're 60% short each year, you're 60% short at the end of 5 years, and that's a big number. Oh. So, and I don't sense that you guys have got those powers to be able to, you don't have the levers to have. Well, I'll finish.
I'll bring you back to the conversation we did have, which was whilst the infrastructure work is happening on the Breda Val big site to prepare it then to get homes out of the ground, we're also working on lots of smaller stuff that is more deliverable, that can happen. And we are interested in deliverable here. Yeah. People need to see something happening. We need to have some impact on their lives. So there are smaller sites that we can work on. And that's what we want to be working on whilst the big stuff is being prepared.
Okay, and I want to leave on that one then, because on that, seeing something happening was where I was coming from in terms of give us what success is going to look like as a committee, what success is going to look like for Guernsey. Come back to us at your leisure when you've done the housing.
We will do so, for definite.
But one final point is, and again on that point of the commissioning of for social housing directly, again, I don't think the levers are there, so I think it's going to require some reworking of that structure to be able to do that in terms of the state's property, in terms of having that command and control. There's no Jean-Luc Picard there going, make it so. And it would be really nice if it was, particularly when it comes to housing for Guernsey. Sure. So thank you ever so much, everybody. We didn't tend to have such a meandering conversation, but, such is life. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone for attending. Cheers now.